How does a coastal city grow powerful enough to shape the trade routes of an entire sea? Along the southern edge of the Mediterranean, where the coastline of North Africa curves gently toward open water, the land rises into low hills overlooking a wide natural bay. The sea here is deep and calm, protected from harsh winds by the shape of the coast. Waves roll quietly toward the shore, reflecting a horizon that stretches endlessly toward distant lands. In this place once stood Carthage. Today, only fragments of stone and earth remain scattered across the landscape near modern Tunis. Ruins of walls and foundations rest among grassy slopes, overlooking the same Mediterranean waters that once carried ships from every corner of the ancient world. But long ago, this quiet shoreline held one of the largest and most powerful cities of the ancient Mediterranean. Carthage was not simply a coastal settlement. It was a harbor megacity. From its earliest development, the city was shaped by its relationship with the sea. The coastline offered natural protection for ships approaching from open waters. Nearby plains provided fertile land for agriculture, while hills overlooking the harbor created defensive advantages and commanding views of the surrounding sea. The city's planners transformed this natural setting into something far more deliberate. Walls rose across the hills, enclosing enormous districts. Straight streets formed an organized grid across the urban landscape, and near the water's edge, Carthage constructed one of the most remarkable harbor systems of the ancient world. Two great ports stood at the heart of the city. One served merchant vessels arriving from distant shores. The other formed a circular harbor designed for fleets of ships. Together, they created a maritime center capable of controlling trade across vast stretches of the Mediterranean. Seen from above, the design reveals a city built around movement, ships entering the harbor, goods traveling along streets, trade flowing outward across the sea. Yet one question still lingers over this coastline. How did Carthage grow from a harbor city into one of the dominant maritime centers of the ancient Mediterranean, and how did its ports and urban design shape the power of the entire city? The coastline around Carthage offered something rare in the ancient Mediterranean, a natural harbor large enough to support a major maritime center. From the open sea, ships approaching the bay would have seen the land rising gently behind the shoreline, with hills forming a backdrop above the water. These hills were not left untouched. Across their slopes, the city expanded outward in carefully organized districts. Streets crossed the terrain in long lines, creating a grid that shaped movement through the urban landscape. Buildings stood close together along these streets, forming dense neighborhoods that stretched from the harbor toward higher ground. But the true heart of Carthage lay beside the water. Along the shoreline, engineers reshaped the coast to create a harbor complex unlike any other in the Mediterranean world. Two ports were constructed side by side, each serving a distinct purpose within the city's maritime system. The outer harbor opened toward the sea. This broad basin welcomed merchant ships arriving from distant shores. Vessels carrying grain, metals, ceramics, and other goods could anchor safely inside its protected waters. From here, cargo moved directly into the city through nearby streets and storage areas. Beyond this commercial harbor stood something even more unusual, a circular inner harbor connected to the outer basin through a narrow channel. Its design formed a perfect ring of docks surrounding a central island. Along the edges of the harbor, covered structures sheltered ships from weather and sun, while ramps allowed vessels to be pulled from the water for repair. Seen from above, the structure appears almost geometric, a circle carved into the shoreline and filled with orderly rows of docking spaces. The design allowed fleets of ships to be maintained within a protected harbor hidden from the open sea. From this maritime center, ships could depart quickly into the Mediterranean, linking Carthage with ports across North Africa, southern Europe, and distant islands. Yet the scale of this harbor complex raises an enduring question. How did a city manage such an enormous maritime system? And what kind of urban organization allowed Carthage to sustain its influence across so much of the Mediterranean world? As Carthage grew across the coastline, the city expanded beyond its harbors into a vast urban landscape that spread across hills, plains, and waterfront districts. From the sea, the first sight would have been the harbor entrances, but behind them rose an entire city, organized around movement, trade, and administration. Streets ran in straight lines through residential districts, forming a clear grid that structured daily life. Rows of houses and workshops filled these blocks, while larger buildings occupied key intersections along the main avenues. The layout allowed goods arriving at the harbor to move efficiently through the city and outward toward inland routes. Beyond the crowded harbor districts, the land rose toward the hills overlooking the bay. Here the city opened into broader spaces. Terraced slopes supported temples and public buildings that stood above the lower neighborhoods. From these elevated points, the harbor complex and much of the coastline remained visible, creating a constant visual connection between the city and the sea that sustained it. Walls encircled large portions of the settlement, forming powerful defensive boundaries across the hills and plains. These fortifications stretched for miles, reinforcing the idea that Carthage was not only a harbor city, but a vast fortified megacity guarding the western Mediterranean. Outside the walls, farmlands spread across the fertile plains behind the city. These agricultural lands supplied food that sustained the large population living within the urban districts. Roads extended outward from the gates, connecting Carthage with inland communities and distant regions across North Africa. The result was a city deeply integrated with both land and sea. Ships arrived at the harbor, goods passed through the streets, resources flowed inward from surrounding countryside. From this network, Carthage maintained its position as one of the most influential urban centers in the Mediterranean. Yet even a city this powerful existed within a changing world. Trade routes shift, rival cities rise, and over time, the balance that sustained Carthage would begin to face pressures from beyond its walls and harbors. Over time, the balance that once sustained Carthage began to change. The harbors still welcomed ships, and the city's streets continued to guide movement across its districts. Walls still stretched across the hills, and the fertile plains behind the city continued to supply food and resources. From the outside, the urban landscape of Carthage remained powerful and organized. But the Mediterranean world was never static. Trade routes shifted as new ports rose along distant coastlines. Competition grew among cities that also sought to control maritime exchange. The sea that had once carried wealth and opportunity could also carry rival powers toward the very harbors that defined Carthage's strength. The city's immense scale made it resilient, yet it also tied its fortunes closely to the stability of the wider Mediterranean. Over time, conflict and shifting political landscapes placed increasing pressure on the harbor megacity. Sections of the urban landscape were damaged or rebuilt across different phases of occupation. Districts changed, structures rose and fell, and the once dominant maritime center gradually transformed, yet the physical landscape endured. Today, the coastline near modern Tunis still reveals traces of Carthage's remarkable design. The outlines of the circular harbor remain visible beneath the ground and water. Stone foundations mark the positions of streets and buildings that once formed the city's grid. Hills overlooking the bay still offer the same commanding view across the Mediterranean. What survives today is not the towering skyline that once dominated the sea, but the structure of a city carefully planned around its harbor. And so the original question returns: how did a coastal settlement grow into one of the most powerful maritime cities of the ancient Mediterranean? Part of the answer lies in geography. The protected bay, fertile plains, and central position along Mediterranean trade routes. Another part lies in planning. Carthage transformed its shoreline into an organized harbor system and shaped the surrounding land into a structured urban landscape. The city was not only built beside the sea, it was built around it. Even now, the quiet coastline preserves the outlines of that design, a harbor megacity whose streets and ports once connected much of the ancient Mediterranean world. If this journey through the harbor landscape of Carthage stayed with you, you may enjoy exploring more ancient cities shaped by the sea. And what do you think mattered more in Carthage's story? The powerful harbors themselves, or the vast network of trade routes that met at its shores?